Okay, we're going to get started. I think we still have some participants joining us in the Zoom room, but we'll start. Welcome to the Washington State Ferries public meeting on the Fauntleroy Terminal Replacement Project. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we are going to be hosting this meeting on Zoom, and we're excited to share project updates with you. All attendees are on mute, and to enable closed captioning, you can click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen if you'll find that helpful for your participation in the meeting. And then we'll be taking all questions and answers through the Q&A box, which is also on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. So go ahead and type your questions or comments in that box at any time during the meeting. And if you're joining by phone, you can participate during the question and answer session by pressing *9, which will raise your hand. And then I will call on you and you'll push *6 to unmute yourself and ask your questions. If you're having any technical difficulties, feel free to reach out through the Q&A box and a member of the team will assist you. And then you can also send longer questions and comments to Fauntleroy termproj, TERMPROJ at wsdot.wa.gov. And feel free to use that email at any time. So good afternoon. My name is Hadley Rodero. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning, Customer, and Government Relations for Washington State Ferries. I'll be moderating the meeting today. Thank you all for being here. We'll be hearing from our project team about the alternatives that Washington State Ferries is considering for replacing the Fauntleroy Ferry Terminal. And I just want to start by thanking the many members of our community advisory group, our technical advisory group, and the executive advisory group who have been guiding this work over the last few years. We truly couldn't have gotten this far or gotten this project to this point without input from members of each of the Triangle communities, our agency partners, local jurisdictions, and tribes. And we're looking forward to hearing from you also during this meeting. So I already talked about how you'll be able to participate. For those of you just joining, look for the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you could submit questions or comments at any time during the presentation, and then we'll get to those toward the end of the meeting. We're going to do our best to answer all the questions during the time we have today, and if we don't have the answers, or if it's a longer answer, we may respond by email. So let's move on to the meeting agenda. We're going to provide a brief overview of the project today and why it's needed. We'll share the alternatives that WSF is considering for replacing the Fauntleroy terminal. And then we'll talk about a concept for improving the intersection at the entrance to the ferry terminal, as well as some of the environmental context and sensitive issues related to the project and the criteria that we're using to make a selection for what alternative we're going to carry forward. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll take your questions and comments, and that will really be most of the meeting, will be the Q&A period. Before we get started with the presentation, I'm going to launch a quick poll here so that we can find out who's in the room with us. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen with two questions. The first one is, where are you joining us from? And why are you most interested in the Fauntleroy Terminal Replacement Project? So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. You'll see the questions on your screen, and if you can just go ahead and select the answer that best fits. And then I'll share the results after a few moments. So again, the questions are, where are you joining us from? Vashon Island, Fauntleroy, or West Seattle, South Kitsap County, Southworth, Port Orchard, or somewhere else? And then why are you most interested in the project? Are you a ferry rider? Do you live in the neighborhood? Do you live in one of the other communities served by the Triangle route? Are you just interested in the project in general? You can choose more than one answer if you'd like. Looks like most participants have answered. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and I'll share the results with you. So the first question looks like we have a really good mix. 60%, a good number of folks from Vashon, quarter of attendees from the Fauntleroy neighborhood or greater West Seattle, and then a few from South Kitsap County and a few from other communities. Thank you all for joining us. I'm glad to see so many of you from the different parts of the Triangle route here. And then it looks like we have a lot of ferry riders who ride the route regularly, 60% of attendees, some from the neighborhood, some from other communities, nearly half from other communities on the route. And then a good number of folks who are just interested and want to stay informed about ferry system issues or the Fauntleroy terminal replacement itself. So great, I'm glad to see such a wide variety of interests here. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And then with that, we'll just move into our presentation. I'm going to introduce, actually, before I do that, we're going to talk about what's gotten us here today. This work that we're going to share is the product of several years since 2021 of community engagement and input. We've received over 1,000 comments from the community, members of the public like yourselves. We've held a number of community meetings and we've met with our advisory groups, the 25 members of our community advisory group, as well as members of our technical advisory group and executives who are helping guide the project. We've also held online open houses and shared information through our website. So all of that has helped inform the range of alternatives and the process that we're going to talk more about today. So thank you for that. And we're looking forward to hearing your input as we get into the project information. So now I'm going to introduce David Sowers, and he's going to kick us off and begin talking about why the project's needed.
All right, well, thank you, Hadley. My name is David Sowers. I'm the director of Washington State Ferry's Terminal Engineering and Construction Group. I'm going to review some brief background material on the terminal and why Washington State Ferries is prioritizing this project. As some of you are aware, WSF is modernizing its fleet with new vessels, adding electrification to our operations, and over the last 10 years has made significant strides replacing outdated terminals, both at Mukilteo and Coleman Dock in downtown Seattle. So the Fauntleroy Ferry Terminal is next on our list. The terminal in West Seattle serves almost 3 million riders per year and supports service between Fauntleroy, Southworth, and Vashon Island. The terminal was built in the 1950s and needs significant work to preserve and to maintain safe and reliable ferry service. The terminal faces several challenges, including an aging, seismically vulnerable part of the terminal that are overdue for replacement. The terminal is at risk of rising sea levels and increasing debris damage during high tides. And it has a number of operational challenges, including limited dock capacity and inefficient intersection and vehicles backing up along Fauntleroy Way. The purpose of this project is to improve operations on the Triangle ferry route, as we like to call it, and preserve and upgrade the terminal. I want to kind of take a quick point through this photograph that's on the screen here and kind of illuminate some of the things that you don't see from up top when you're parked in your car, but actually the condition of the facility. You can see in this picture, there's a number of steel connections that have been added on or retrofitted to the existing piling and the joists that support the decking. There's a lot of debris on the beach. You'll see in this photo that it clearly is a problem to banging up against the utilities that are underneath the facility. So this is really if you ever get out to Cove Park and wander around and peek underneath the dock, you can see firsthand the age and the vulnerability and the condition of this aging dock. And like an old car, it's definitely, it needs to be replaced. So the next slide here, we're using a process called the Planning and Environmental Linkages process, which is we call PEL for short. This is an early planning phase that helps WSF identify transportation issues, environmental concerns, the community's values, and economic goals early in the project planning. So we are currently in what we call level 3, which that part of the screening process Marshall will talk about here in a little bit. But we're in this process, we're considering things like traffic conditions, cost estimates, permitting requirements, a little bit about constructability, and things that will make the terminal safer and more efficient for everybody. With input from the community, we're also studying good to go and advanced ticketing, which is something that we're looking at as a pilot project at Fauntleroy. During this phase, the project team is using input from the community and the advisory groups, the executive advisory group, the technical advisory group, and the community advisory group to refine this range of alternatives, a range of concepts that we call alternatives. Later this year, WSF will recommend an alternative that we will then take into the next level of environmental review, which is called the NEPA process. So I'd like to share a little bit more about what that process looks like. This graphic kind of shows how we've narrowed those alternatives down. Again, if you haven't been following along, the level 1 screening took us from I think around 15 options, including some options outside of the Fauntleroy area. Those were screened out. In level 2, we decided on 2 main options, and we'll talk about that here in a second. And now we're in the process of refining those alternatives before we recommend an alternative that we will move into that NEPA phase next year. I did want to talk briefly about some terminology. I think that's been bouncing back and forth on the same footprint alternative. WSF considered and eliminated a same footprint alternative. So this is exactly the same size, square footage as the existing dock during this PEL study. This alternative was a dock that would be exactly the same in square footage, but it does not meet several elements of the project's purpose and need. For example, it does not meet the efficient and safe loading and fare processing for pedestrians, vehicles, and bicycles, because the dock would be too crowded for crews to effectively sort and stage all of the freight, ADA, emergency, and priority vehicles, because the dock essentially wouldn't have that available space. And this is especially difficult on a multi-destination route. It also does not provide the operational efficiencies to support reliable service, meeting those long-term projections in our 2040 long-range plan for demand on this route. It includes less space to hold the vehicles, and that equates to longer backups on Fauntleroy Way. And again, like I said, an inability to sort traffic destined for 2 locations. So, and then finally, it does not improve the multimodal connectivity. It doesn't enhance the customer's experience or accommodate this ridership growth. And so for those reasons, this option did not meet the project's needs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ed Thomas, who's going to explain a little bit about the terminology, and then he's going to walk through the alternatives that remain under consideration. So with that, Ed, you want to take it away?
Thanks, Dave. Hello, everyone. My name is Ed Thomas, and I'm the engineering lead for the project. Before we share the alternatives, we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with all of the technical terms we're using. The diagram here on this key terminal features slide shows key elements of the ferry terminal. Ferry terminals have several unique operational and safety features. Dolphins and wing walls are the in-water berthing structures that help vessels land safely at the terminal, and the trestle, also referred to as the dock, and the transfer span support loading and unloading vehicle traffic. WSF developed concepts that replace the terminal at a similar size as the existing terminal, and concepts that expand the terminal to provide more on-dock vehicle holding capacity. So, some common features of the new terminal. There are several key features consistent across all alternatives. Replace the dock at the same location, accommodate 186 vehicles between on-dock and Fauntleroy Way holding, meet seismic design standards and accommodate rising sea level, space for large trucks to safely navigate, wider lanes and space for people walking, rolling, biking, and driving motorcycles, more space for operations, a new terminal building, dedicated drop-off and pickup area for passengers with disabilities, a larger toll plaza with 2 toll booths, and minimal dock widening near the shoreline. In addition to these features, as Dave mentioned, we're also studying good to go advanced ticketing, and other features like overhead passenger loading, and working with our partners at Seattle Department of Transportation to consider changes to the intersection. So this slide shows the collection of all the alternatives. There are slight variations in each alternative, and we're going to run through these slides rather quickly a couple of times to show the differences. Then I will talk in more detail about each alternative. Please take note of the shaded blue areas on either side of the dock. This is eelgrass habitat, which Marcia will speak to in greater detail a little bit later. We designed the terminal options to avoid impacting this environmentally sensitive area. Okay, this first option, alternative A, replaces the dock at the same size as the current dock and maintains the existing wing walls and dolphins, which are the in-water structures that help guide the ferry into place and protect the dock. This concept is slightly wider than the current dock to provide space for a large vehicle to navigate the dock and provide space for pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles. The dock capacity is 76 vehicles, fewer cars than the current dock. The dock width is 85 feet. The length of the pedestrian walkway is 850 feet, and it has 4 holding lanes. Alternative A1 is similar to alternative A, but includes new dolphins and wing walls. This option is slightly longer and holds the same amount of vehicles as the current dock. Current dock capacity and capacity of A1 is 84 vehicles. The dock width is 85 feet. Length of the pedestrian walkway is 905 feet, and it has 4 holding lanes. So alternatives A2 and A3 are variations of alternative A1 that have the same layout as alternative A1 and include good to go and advanced ticketing as A2, or only advanced ticketing technology as A3. Alternative B is similar to alternative A1, but is longer, moving the transfer span, wing walls, and dolphins to deeper water. Moving these elements to deeper water may allow eelgrass and macroalgae to regrow in and around the scour hole. This dock capacity is 124 vehicles, or 1 full Issaquah class ferry. The dock width is 85 feet. The length of the pedestrian walkway is 1,105 feet, and it has 4 holding lanes. Alternative B1 is the same length as alternative B and includes 1 extra holding lane on the north over deeper water to minimize impacts to Cove Park and environmentally sensitive areas closer to shore. This dock capacity is 155 vehicles. Its width is 94 feet, and the length of the pedestrian walkway is 1,105 feet, and it has 5 holding lanes. Alternative B2 is similar in length to alternative B1 and adds 2 shorter holding lanes to the south further out over the water. This tapered dock design is narrower near the shoreline. Dock capacity is 155 vehicles. Dock width is 76.5 feet near shore and 103 feet over deeper water. The length of the pedestrian walkway is 1,115 feet, and it has 4 full-length holding lanes and 2 half lanes. Alternative B3 is the same configuration as alternative B2, is slightly shorter than alternative B2, and includes 1 less holding lane. The rest of the design features that are the same as alternative B2. This dock capacity is 124 vehicles. Its width is 66.5 feet near shore and 93 feet over deeper water. The length of the pedestrian walkway is 1,090 feet. It has 3 full-length holding lanes and 2 half lanes. And the final alternative, alternative C, is the same configuration again as alternative B2 and adds a full-length holding lane on the north side of the dock. This dock option can hold 186 vehicles, removing the vehicle queue on Fauntleroy Way Southwest on most typical days. Its width is 85.5 feet near shore and 112 feet over deeper water. The length of the pedestrian walkway is 1,105 feet. It has 5 holding lanes, full-length holding lanes, and 2 half lanes. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Charlie to review some visualization graphics.
Hey, thanks, Ed. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlie Torres, and I'm the project manager for the terminal replacement project. We have developed design renderings to help you better visualize the differences between each alternative. Please keep in mind these show conceptual finishes based on Washington State Ferry's new Mukilteo terminal. The intent is to show the dock footprint and general layout for each alternative. We will seek community input on the look and feel of the terminal later on in the design process. So this first image of the current dock is taken from the King County pump station. These renderings help show what each dock option looks like near Cove Park. Okay. This is the current view from Cove Park, and these next few slides show how each alternative looks from the beach. This next, okay, just from the beach. Okay. This next view shows the existing walking path and what the pedestrian pathway and dedicated bicycle lane look like. The walkway is 7 feet wide, the same as the current dock. Okay. Finally, this is the view of the dock from Captain's Park and each alternative from Captain's Park. And to address one of the key needs for the project, improving terminal efficiency and faster ferry loading and unloading, Washington State Ferries will improve the intersection of Fauntleroy Way Southwest and the terminal at Barton Street Southwest. Washington State Ferries is working closely with agency partners, specifically Seattle Department of Transportation and King County Metro, to plan an improved intersection configuration that includes a traffic signal. These improvements are needed for any alternative selected and will be needed during construction of the new terminal. Washington State Ferries will begin intersection improvements ahead of the larger terminal replacement project. We will share more information as plans progress. Now let me pass it off to my colleague, Marcia Tolan, to talk to us about permitting and environmental issues.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm Marcia Tolan with Washington State Ferries Permitting and Environmental Lead. This image that's appearing before you shows key environmental features and resources near the terminal that we consider as we develop the alternatives and what we will consider as we screen the alternatives. The key environmental features include intertidal and nearshore habitats near the dock that provide valuable habitat for salmon and other marine life. There are eelgrass beds to the north and south of the trestle, and then there's a high concentration of kelp to the west of the ferry slip. There's no eelgrass or macroalgae in the area around the end of the dock, where propeller wash from vessels creates a scour hole. There's Fauntleroy Creek, which flows under Fauntleroy Way southwest, and then under the dock and into Puget Sound. Fauntleroy Creek provides some essential spawning habitat for coho salmon and for coastal cutthroat trout. The trestle itself, the facility out there for the terminal, is supported by 430 creosote treated timber piles, and they are aging. The dock includes more than 1,000 tons of toxic creosote treated timber, a known water pollutant. The density of the timber piles also influences how the flow of Puget Sound tidal waters and Fauntleroy Creek near the trestle, how that moves, and how it can cause debris and driftwood to collect under the trestle and on the shore. This makes it difficult for fish to pass to and from Fauntleroy Creek. There are 2 parks adjacent to the terminal facility. One is Cove Park, which offers public waterfront access and a narrow sandy beach next to the dock just on the north side. And then there's Captain's Park to the west, which provides a public green space with bench seating across Fauntleroy Way southwest from the terminal entrance. To move closer to recommending an alternative that we move forward with, we'll conduct a level 3 screening process similar to how we did the level 2 screening. We developed these criteria based on our project purpose and need statement, which was extensively reviewed by our advisory groups. It's important to note that in partnership with our advisory groups, we refine the screening criteria we used in level 1 and level 2 to develop our level 3 screening criteria. The screening process is much more detailed for level 3 and uses more specific metrics. This list includes the general categories we're using for level 3 screening of alternatives. To view the full list of screening criteria, please visit our online open house. So listed here are the screening criteria categories, and they include meet requirements for structural reliability, accommodate project sea level rise, and the metric for that is resilience, improve operational efficiency, the metrics are minimized dwell time, process vehicles more efficiently, maintain on-time performance. Reduce the number of conflict points between traffic modes, and the metrics are safety of vehicles, bicyclists, and pedestrians. Then to meet operational requirements, those metrics are 186 vehicles on the dock or in upland holding, access and maneuverability for an ISPA class vessel, and connection to a minor arterial. Keep current sailing schedule, and the metrics are number of peak departures and crossing times, and then policy risk. Next is enhancing multimodal connections, which is to connect to transit or allow for growth in walk-ons, people biking, and van pools. Then to avoid changes to parks and recreational areas, and these are usually known as Section 4F and 6F properties under the National Environmental Policy Act regulations. And then recreation, and at the state level, it's projects that are funded by the Recreation and Conservation Office. Then requires traffic changes to traffic circulation on local streets in the ferry terminal area. Project cost, and those metrics are design, planning, right-of-way, risk, construction, alignment with the current project schedule, and project feasibility, amount of additional right-of-way needed beyond the existing terminal footprint for an expanded footprint, for utilities or construction. And then finally, permitting and coordination. This is the level of coordination with external partners, permitting complexity, and tribal coordination. I'll hand it back to you, Hadley.
Thanks, Marcia. So we're now at the time in the meeting where we're going to take your questions. I see already some questions have been submitted, but if you joined us late, we're taking questions and comments in the Q&A box, which is in the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And in addition to the presenters that you heard from already, we have two other panel members that are ready to answer your questions. Mark Bandy is a member of our consultant team, and he's leading all the traffic studies and traffic information. And then Trevor Sharp is with WSF's operations department. So they're both going to also be available to answer your questions. So go ahead and put any questions or comments you have in the Q&A, and we'll just get started. The first one, Mark, is for you. When you are thinking about the traffic signal, will it be timed so that an entire vessel can unload without vehicles queued on the vessel?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So the way our intent here is we'll be designing the signal so that it has detection for vehicles, pedestrians, and buses, whether they're approaching from along Fauntleroy or on the dock itself for the unloading vehicles. And what that'll mean is we can change the traffic timing to respond to when the different movements have higher volumes. And so one of the things that just remember, it won't necessarily entirely unload a vessel, but it'll go in kind of batches, but to keep the unloading process efficient as possible. But a reminder, we do have, when that's happening at its highest volume period in the morning, we also have people trying to cross Fauntleroy Way to get to and from rapid ride transit services, as well as needing to keep the traffic on Fauntleroy and buses moving along Fauntleroy Way. So it's always a balancing act, but we're way different from today without a traffic signal or without a uniformed officer out there. The signal is a really good strategy to respond to those variations in how much volume is on any approach and who's trying to cross the intersection. So that's how our intent would be to design it. And then one last item there is we would also be working with the city, as was mentioned, to connect it back to their transportation operations center, which allows them to monitor and see signals throughout the city and any sort of additional adjustments that might be needed to kind of keep people moving in all directions.
David, we have a couple comments and questions here. Why is WSF not adding a second slip to the dock? And is that something you've considered?
Yeah, we've heard this question before. It's not currently part of the project. The real need is the replacement of the trestle, which is aging and deteriorating. Most of our service, begins on the peninsula or on Vashon Island, so our boats are tied up on that side of the water, on the west side. We've certainly are looking at the on-time performance of our vessels, and we know that when there's long backups and when we have challenges loading and unloading, that a second slip does provide some advantages, but it's just not in the budget at the moment. There is plans to right now to add a second slip at Southworth. That's in our long-range plan, but not at Fauntleroy.
Thanks, Dave. Marcia, can you explain in more detail what you meant by policy risk as one of the screening criteria?
Well, the way that we develop our terminals and including the structures are all based off of regulations and guidelines. And some of those guidelines or regulations, for example, design, if the alternative has some aspects to it that change how some of those guidelines are, we may need to work through and develop certain policy related to it. For example, if it's just non-standard design for some reason, but we are still meeting our regulations, the criteria of it, we need to document that clearly and develop justification for it and assure that it's still, that even with this design change, it's meeting the regulations that are required. For example, Americans with Disabilities Act. On another level, some of the elements of the project that we are investigating, such as good to go terminology or tolling, although it's been implemented across the state for state highways, it has not yet been implemented in the same manner for Washington State ferries. And to carry that through could require some policy development that's with our legislatures, as well as with executive management of Washington State ferries and with DOT. So in screening that with alternatives, we look at what are the risks and benefits of each of our criteria, and this is one of those.
Mark, David, a couple comments here about how we're designing for the future, and if you're looking out, say, 70 years or shorter than that when you design this facility. And one commenter is pointing out that our long-range plan only goes through 2040, which isn't that far away. So what's the design life of this facility, and how are you using future projections to design the new terminal?
Sure, I'll talk to that real quick. It's pretty common in the how our planning horizons for not just Washington State ferries, but also land use comprehensive planning entities such as Beason Regional Council, City of Seattle, City of Bremerton, et cetera. It's a very common practice and plan for following the guidance, best available guidance and regulations on this, to essentially look out about 20-year horizons. So when the 2040 plan was put together, that was the time horizon. Example now is PSRC is looking at 2050 for their horizon. So it is actually, while it may seem like it's not that long of a horizon, it kind of comes into, if you go beyond that, you're probably getting fairly into some speculative territory with respect to how much growth and everything's going to assume. So it represents a good horizon that is we are factoring into the project assumptions here. With respect to the ferry service and size of vessels, it's the 2040 long-range plan for Washington State ferries for this route has continuing to be served by the Issaquah class ferries, which are 124 vehicle capacity. The 3-boat schedule assumption that was put into place and developed a few years ago, just prior to the pandemic. Those are some of the major assumptions that are feeding into our work here in terms of the transportation analysis.
Thank you, Mark. Dave, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Mark covered it very well.
Okay. One comment here about thinking that maybe the toll booths are a constraint to getting on the dock. Did we consider, Ed, in some of the earlier alternatives, having the toll booth moved further up the queue, or putting toll booths outside of the terminal, sort of remote holding or something like that?
Yes, some of the earlier level alternatives did consider looking at remote holding options, and they never made it through the screening process. One of the concerns there was the added time it would take to process from that captured holding farther away from the terminal, the time down Fauntleroy Way across the dock onto the boat.
One of you can answer this one, so I'll let you all jump in. David, maybe you could start. How will ferry traffic be handled during construction of the new terminal?
Yeah, so regardless of the alternatives selected in front of you, the footprint that we have to work with, the need to continue to provide service during construction, and all those factors make this a very challenging, space to work in. Out on the highway, for example, you can typically open up some median area and shift traffic to the left or to the right and create some work zone. Here, we don't have that luxury, and it's something that the team is looking very closely at as to how we would reconstruct the dock, essentially demoing, say half of the dock, the north side, replacing it, and then shifting the traffic over to that new portion of the dock, and then taking down the south side of the dock and doing the staged dance back and forth to construct the new facility. So this is something that's going to drive a lot of the cost of this project because we have no intentions to shut down the facility, which of course would be the easy way to do it and just tackle it. But we plan to continue to provide service, and so we'll have to figure that answer that question out.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And then a second part of this, someone's suggesting we could run service to Seattle's Coleman Dock during construction, and that is certainly something that my team's going to look at, and service options will all be considered when we get closer to construction of what the sailing schedule will be and what that sailing patterns will be during construction, as Dave just said, different phases of construction. So thank you for those comments. Mark, as a follow-up to your comments on the signal, who will own or operate the traffic signal when it's all done?
Well, the intersection itself is in the jurisdiction of the city of Seattle, and so that's why we're, of course, beginning discussions with them. We would expect that day in and day out they would operate it. Who actually owns the signal, that's going to be part of our further discussions with the city of Seattle.
Thank you. Ed, is there a structural need to rebuild or change the terminal building itself?
Yeah, there is. The structural build, or the terminal building is in need of improvement, mainly just due to the fact that its size is no longer adequate to meet operational and passenger space to accommodate our ridership projections and to meet current structural codes. As we develop the trestle or the dock that actually supports the building, it would need to accommodate seismic loading during one of those events.
Thanks. I'm just going to pause and say we're taking questions and comments in the Q&A box. If you want to type your question, now would be a good time to do that. And we're going to keep running through the questions that have been submitted so far. Dave, here's a good question. How is it possible that we have alternatives with the same or less holding capacity on the dock as the current dock? And this commenter saying that seems like there's a clear inability to meet the objectives of the project. So maybe you can clarify the total holding capacity of all the alternatives and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll try. So I think there's some terminology floating around. There's been talk about a same size dock, and then there's been talk about a same footprint size dock. We've evaluated both a dock that's exactly the same size as what's out there today, and in order to accommodate the walkways, the bicycle lanes, staging for all modes, it actually shrinks the holding capacity of the dock. So through the PAL process, we've rejected a same size dock. The terminology similar size dock was used early on, and that refers to a dock that has the same holding capacity, which is around 80 cars. And when we say that, to build an 80-car dock, which is what's out there today, the dock actually gets a little bit wider because we have standards that we have to meet with barrier railing, offsets to pedestrians, bicycle lanes, and all these and the multimodal features. So the dock, even though we call it a same size dock, it actually gets a little bit larger, even though it's in terms of holding capacity, it's the same. There are other operational concepts that people have tossed out about using, for example, good to go or requiring advanced ticketing. And so one of the efforts of the traffic team is to try to figure out whether those measures could be implemented here, which don't exist in any of our routes, but it could be implemented here as a way to keep the dock essentially the same size, the 80 cars, but allow us to process, sort, manage traffic, and do all the things that we need to do, knowing that there's continuing growth on this route, and knowing that, of course, that the at peak times that the dock that we currently have is not as efficient as it could be. So there are some ways that we're exploring that we could use technology to kind of address the fact that the dock isn't very efficient at the moment during those peak times. We need to go through that process and figure out whether there's some real value there, or whether a larger dock is the end solution. That's the process that we're in at the moment. Hope that helps.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Charlie, good question here. Has anyone from the project team gone out to observe the terminal or collect data or talk to the ferry workers directly, or is all of this based on paper data? Can you talk a little bit about the work that the team's been doing? You're on mute, Charlie.
Got it, thanks. Yes, we've gone out, we've had meetings not just with the terminal staff so they can explain to us, what they experienced throughout the day when the peaks are. But we've also gone and measured traffic right there at the site again during some of the more congested times. But we've been out there for numerous occasions to observe the traffic.
Thanks, Charlie. David, you just talked a little bit about this, but are there any plans to integrate good to go or electronic tolling into the project?
Well, we're gonna examine whether that's feasible. There's the technical elements of good to go that, as an agency, WashDOT has been using on a number of its highways. SR 99, I'm sure you all have used, 520, 405. So the technology exists. The idea is how we would implement that technology at a ferry terminal and streamline our loading and processing. So yeah, I mean, we're going to kind of explore that and see if there's a real advantage to that. And if there is, then maybe the options that we could select in the end don't have to be as substantial, because we get some efficiencies out of good to go.
Dave, while your mic's on, we have a couple follow-up questions about your comments about a second slip and why you're focused on adding a second slip at Southworth instead of Fauntleroy, and if that's driven by growth in South Kitsap County or other reasons. Can you just explain kind of operationally what you were mentioning before?
Yeah, maybe this is a better question for Trevor Sharp, who's our operations guy here. The idea of a second slip's been around for quite a while, and again, I said at the beginning, to have our boats tied up in the morning on the west side of the route is advantageous. It helps us get to crew over to Vashon easier and starts our day better. Also, to the other question I think that was asked is there intention that second slip would serve Seattle as a direct route, and that is not the plan. It's really so that we have that redundancy in the system to have a place for a second boat to tie up. But I don't know, Trevor, is there any more on the history of that you want to add?
It's giving you a thumbs up. I think you hit it.
Okay,
Oh,
all right.
You nailed it, Dave.
Okay.
Okay. Ed, there's a comment here that I'll read out loud and you can comment on if you want. Will the new terminal building have more comfortable seats? And the comment is that the current benches aren't very comfortable.
That is a design element that we will have to address as we get further in detailed design after the NEPA process, but that comment will be duly noted.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Marcia, you can maybe start with this one. During construction, would Cove Park be available for community use?
At times, depending upon the type of construction activity, there could be times where for public safety, we may need to limit access to Cove Park. And that could, span just for a few hours during a day to a couple of days. It's hard to speculate that at this time, but it would be limited to the minimum that's needed to complete a specific work task. But you might expect that there would be sometimes for public safety to limit how people access Cove Park, but generally the approach is to keep it open to the degree possible.
Ed, how much higher will the new dock be from the water level to accommodate sea level rise?
That's a good question. Currently, the alternatives that we have shown here have an approximate 4-foot elevation rise at the bridge seat, which is the end of the dock where the transfer span connects to the dock. And then from that, you come back to shore, and the actual dock would connect upland at about the same elevation. So it's about an approximate 4-foot rise. The slope that is current there today on the trestle would be drastically minimized by raising the offshore end, and it would better accommodate ADA slope because it would be rather flat. But it's currently shown at approximate 4-foot elevation. And as we continue with study and design, we're going to be coordinating with terminal engineering there at WSF, and they're going to help us with some resiliency analysis to actually set that elevation as we move forward with detailed design.
Hadley, can I add to that?
Yeah, please do.
The question, Ed answered the 4-foot higher trestle. So currently the trestle is 2 feet lower than the trestles on the other side of the water, Southworth and Vashon. So forget sea level rise, it's too low today. It's 2 feet too low. So we're going to bring it up 2 feet to match the others across the water, and then for sea level rise, approximately 2 more feet. So I didn't want you to go away thinking that our estimate is 4 feet for sea level rise. It's about 2.
Mark, we have a couple of questions here. I'm going to kind of combine them about different methods of ticketing, whether good to go would be used and what that would do for fares and peak time surcharges, whether advanced ticketing would be mandated, and whether the Orca card program would be part of that. How's all that going to be considered as part of our study of advanced ticketing and good to go?
Sure. So we're actually right in the middle of evaluating some different options around primarily good to go. With respect to advanced ticketing, it's sort of thinking about the way to go system that's already in place and how much different in processing time of loading a vessel could be gained by those different approaches. They each have varying degrees of probably improving the loading process, or basically reducing the dwell time that happens at the ticket booths. They have some different trade-offs with respect to what it means from the customer perspective, as well as fares, as well as cost to implement. And so we're in the midst of actually writing up documents that describe that, as well as evaluate how much difference it make. So several different ways we can approach that, and have been thinking about that. So there's information to come soon.
Mark. Yeah, and I think you've touched on this a little bit, David, but I think it's worth we've got a couple follow-up questions. Can you explain again why we're considering 76 car or 84 car vehicles, and if that is that total capacity, or how would that accommodate future growth?
Yeah, so the alternative A is a 84 car dock, and that is the smallest dock in terms of holding capacity that we're looking at. We're not looking at the 76. It's an 84, and then we go up from there.
Okay, thank you. So we're nearing the end of our questions here. I'm going to ask the team a few more that we haven't touched on yet today. When do we, let's see who probably can answer this. Charlie, when do we expect to begin construction? And do you have any idea of how long construction will take?
I'll look at my crystal ball. The intersection project, we're planning on beginning design of that the latter half of this calendar year. And we'd like to advertise it in the spring and do the construction at the end of 2025 in the fall season, and it might stretch out into the beginning of 2026. The trestle part, we haven't quite nailed it down, but we believe there's going to be a gap after the intersection project of a year or so. Then we'll have we can begin that project, but that hasn't been finalized. We haven't gotten to NEPA yet, but it's looking like it's a little ways after the intersection project.
Thanks, Carly. Ed, in addition to designing for seismic resiliency, do you also design for tsunamis?
Tsunami wave loading will be part of the design criteria. Once we get into a final design element, yes.
And then another one, you talked about the length of the pedestrian walkway is slightly different for each of the alternatives. And this comment says, it seems like the relative length of the dock for pedestrians is not significantly different from what we have today. Would you say that's accurate, or can you talk about those differences?
I would say that's accurate. The longer trestle alternatives that we have currently developed range in added length to be between 200 and 250 feet, essentially, from existing.
Okay. Another question for you, another design related question. You're getting a lot today. Would the dolphins need to be replaced only for extending the length of the dock, or are they due for replacement anyway?
So the alternative A that we showed utilizes the existing wing walls and dolphins as an alternative, and unfortunately, due to all of the other design requirements that we have, for accommodating all of the the vehicles, the pedestrians and motorcycles and bicyclists, it shortens the length of the trestle over existing. That's why it shows the reduced holding capacity of 76 vehicles. As we get into the other alternatives, A1 moving forward, they increase incrementally in length of where the new bridge seat needs to be placed based on the trestle, and it pushes the berthing structures, wing walls and dolphins, into slightly deeper water. So that may require or will require longer lengths of piles, and so it would result in new berthing structures for those alternatives.
Thanks, Ed. Mark, as part of this project, is there any anticipated changes to roadway improvements on Fauntleroy Way north along Lincoln Park or outside of the terminal area itself?
We have not identified anything beyond the intersection improvements at this time. I think maybe along those lines, a question we received last night at the community meeting was about changes to the holding lane and how it's signed and restricted. And I'll just share the answer we provided last night. That's what's on people's minds, is that as part of our traffic analysis work, we will be sharing information on what that might mean for length and frequency of how far the holding lane is occupied along Fauntleroy Way. It'll help us all decide understand that, excuse me. Down the line, that may, in terms of which project if alternative is advanced, might then lead to a discussion with the city and the community about how holding lane is, what times it's in place versus its extent, but we don't know that yet, obviously. But that's the only discussion item that's not right at the intersection itself.
Thanks, Mark. David, have you considered a floating dock option, or would that be a possibility for this project?
Someone else brought that up, I think, in one of our community meetings. It's certainly something that I think it's worth taking a look at. We do not have any floating docks in our inventory, but obviously we have floating bridges in Western Washington that the state's built and has used for decades. So I think the challenges with that would be how it fixes in the water and the use of anchors and other sort of ground disturbing elements to keep that in position. It would help us deal with sea level rise. So I think that's something that design team take a look at. But yeah, it's not sure how it would work exactly. That would have to be fleshed out.
Thanks, Dave. Trevor, one of the key operational challenges of the current dock is line cutting. And a couple of folks have mentioned that in comments today. It's a big problem. How will the project address line cutting, or how operationally would that be addressed?
It's going to depend on the size of the dock and how much traffic is going to be taken off the street or put back onto the street. So once we come up with an alternative, we'll sit down with the crew in Fauntleroy and the deck and boat crew, or the vessel and terminal crew, and work out a way with it.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. David, how have you talked about using growth projections from the 2040 long range plan? How have those future ridership projections been adjusted since COVID, or does WSF plan to make any adjustments to those?
Well, I think we've seen since COVID a change in behavior, but we are seeing on this route and all of our routes us returning back to sort of pre-pandemic levels in terms of vehicles and almost there with pedestrians. So yes, it's a little bit of a bump or a dip in the numbers. But again, we're building this facility with a 75-year design life. So as Mark kind of hit on, it's going to be long after the projections that we have in 2040. We're continuing to see growth in Kitsap County and on the peninsula. And so we're very mindful of the growth that this route could see. And consequently, we're not just looking at this as a 2040 solution. This is something that will be around long after we're all gone. This facility will still be out there.
Yeah, and I'll just add that we're also going to be updating our 2040 long range plan starting here pretty soon. And the idea is that we do it at least once a decade, but with COVID, it needs to be done a lot sooner than that because, as Dave just mentioned, circumstances have changed. So that's pretty much the end of our questions. I think there's one more that's a good one to end on because it sort of summarizes the process that we've been following and where we're going to be. And this is a comment about how community input is going to be incorporated into the project and whether we're treating each community, Fauntleroy, Vashon, and Southworth equally, or would we be weighting community input through our process? And the answer is that this route is part of the state highway system. It's actually designated as State Route 160. And we think that all three communities have an important say in what happens for this project because they all have different interests. As the commenter points out, it is part of the Fauntleroy community and neighborhood, and there's residents that live around the terminal. It's also a lifeline for Vashon Islanders to get to and from the mainland and need to allow them to have continuous ferry service. And then from South Kitsap County, which is growing quite quickly, as David just mentioned, it's also that highway connection for the highway that reaches from Kitsap County into the city of Seattle. So for all those reasons, all three communities are working closely with us on this process, and we'll be listening to all of them and trying to find a solution that kind of balances all the needs using that screening criteria that Marcia outlined earlier. And our community advisory group is key to that. There's 25 members of the community represent all three communities and are providing us input and working together to kind of collaborate on giving us guidance as we move forward with the project. So thank you for that comment. And with that, I think we'll wrap up the meeting. If you have any further questions or comments, please go to our online open house. The link is in the chat. You can submit comments through May 24th on the online open house. We also meet regularly with our advisory groups, and all those meetings are open to the public. We post the links to register on the project website, and that's where we announce those upcoming meetings. We do meet with our community advisory group, with technical advisory group, which is members of our agency partners, and other jurisdictional staff. And then we meet fairly regularly with an executive advisory group, which is all the elected officials that represent communities on this route, as well as executives from transit agencies and other agencies. So we'll be working with those groups as we finish the level 3 screening process and select an alternative to advance into the further environmental review and design process. And we're looking to wrap that process up later this year. We'll also be offering additional community outreach opportunities and the chance to comment on that alternative that's selected. So look for those opportunities before we complete the Pell study. On the screen is the link to the online open house. It's also there at the top of the page, and it's in the chat, engage.wsdot.wa.gov/Fauntleroy-ferry-terminal. You can send us an email at any time or visit the project website for more information or to find out how to join any of our advisory group meetings. So with that, thank you for all the really great questions and comments today. Even if I didn't get to all of them, we're reading all of them. It's really informative for our project, and I appreciate all your time. Thank you and have a great afternoon.